A hand grabbed a fistful of hair and dragged a girl across the stone floor. Her knees scraped. Her arms flailed. A guard's boot caught her in the ribs and she folded over, gasping. Somewhere above her a crowd roared. They wanted blood. They wanted the thief punished, and they wanted to watch. She was thrown down at the foot of a raised stone throne, a crust of stolen bread still clenched in her frozen fist. Her name was Wren Ashcombe, and she weighed less than the chains they had wrapped around her wrists. But then she lifted her head. She smelled something wrong, something hidden in the king's silver cup of wine, and instead of begging for her own life, she screamed two words no Omega had ever dared scream at an Alpha King. What did that girl smell no one else could? Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up and tell you how she got here, because it matters. Wren Ashcombe was the lowest thing in the Ironclaw pack, not a warrior, not a hunter, not even a servant with a proper place. She was an Omega, and in Frostpine Valley that word was close to an insult. Omegas got the scraps. They got the cold end of the den. They got blamed first and fed last. And Wren had been fed last for so long that her ribs showed through her thin shirt like the bars of a cage. Let me tell you what a day looked like for her so you understand. She woke before the sun in the corner of a shared den, the corner nearest the door where the cold came in. She hauled water. She scraped hides. She carried wood on a back that had never once been strong because it had never once been fed enough to grow strong. And when the pack sat down to eat, she waited. She stood against the wall with the other Omegas and she waited. And by the time the bowl came to her, there was broth and bone and not much else. Nobody looked at her while she ate it. That was the part that stayed with you if you ever asked her later, not the hunger. The way 200 people could look straight through a person like she was a draft in the room. She had a wolf, though. Every soul in the pack did. A wolf that lived inside them and walked beside them, half spirit and half flesh. Most Omega wolves were small and timid, bred down over generations until they barely lifted their heads. But Wren's wolf was different. Ember was a scarred gray she-wolf with one torn ear and eyes the color of banked coals. Nobody knew where a starving Omega got a wolf like that. Nobody asked. They just kept their distance, because Ember had a way of staring at a person until that person suddenly remembered somewhere else to be. Here's a thing about Ember you should know. In 9 winters, no warrior in the pack had ever been able to hold her stare. Grown hunters, men with scars and rank, would find their eyes sliding off her like water off a stone. And more than one of them had wondered out loud, quietly, why the meanest wolf in the valley had bonded herself to the smallest, weakest girl in it. It didn't fit. Nothing about Wren fit, but there she was. That winter had been the worst anyone could remember. The snow came early and never stopped. The hunting parties came back empty, day after day, boots dragging, hands empty, faces gray. And in a pack that fed its warriors first, an Omega on the bottom rung got nothing at all. The broth stopped. The bones stopped. For a week, Wren had licked frost off the woodpile just to have something cold and wet in her stomach. She had gone 4 full days without a bite of food when she finally did the thing they dragged her in here for. She waited until the guard on the storehouse turned his back against the wind. She slipped through the gap behind the great hall, and she took 1 loaf of bread. 1 loaf. That was the crime. Now here's the thing about the Ironclaw pack. Their laws were old and hard, and the punishment for theft from the royal stores was not a scolding. It was the stripping of pack bond. Exile into a valley full of rogue wolves and hungry winter, which for an Omega alone meant death, only slower. So when the guards caught her with crumbs on her lips, they didn't lock her in a cell. They dragged her straight to court, because the king himself happened to be holding his midwinter session that very hour. And that brings us to the man on the throne. Alpha King Daemon Voss. You have to understand what Daemon was to these people. He had held the Ironclaw crown for 9 hard years, and he'd taken it young, after his father died in a border war. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a short black beard going gray at the edges and a scar that ran from his temple down under his collar. He had killed challengers. He had held the valley together through 3 brutal winters, and he had grown into the kind of king who trusted almost no one, because almost no one had ever given him a reason to. He'd learned that lesson young and learned it hard. His own uncle had tried for the throne in the first year and nearly took it. A trusted captain had sold a border pass to a rival pack in the 3rd. By the 9th winter Daemon Voss ate alone, slept with his door barred, and let exactly no one stand behind him. A king like that hears the word loyalty 1,000 times and believes it may be never. Keep that in mind too. It's going to matter more than you think. The men around his throne were the pack elders, 6 of them, old and gray and draped in fur and silver. They ran the council. They advised the king, managed the stores, kept the laws, and blessed the ceremonies. To the pack, the elders were nearly as sacred as the throne itself. Keep that in your mind. It becomes everything. So Ren was thrown down on the stone, chained, starving, a crust of bread in her fist, and the whole court packed in to watch an Omega get sentenced. It should have been quick. It should have been ugly and over in a minute. The eldest of the council, a lean old wolf named Corvin Thorne, rose and read the charge in a dry voice. Theft from the royal stores. He asked the girl if she denied it. She didn't. She couldn't. The bread was right there in her hand. Daemon looked down at her from the throne and felt nothing but tired. He had judged 100 of these. Another Omega, another empty belly, another law broken because the winter made animals of them all. He knew how it went. He opened his mouth to speak the sentence, and in his head it was already spoken, already done, the girl already dragged back out into the snow. And that was the exact moment the elders brought out the wine. It was tradition, you see. At every midwinter court, before the king passed his first judgment, the council poured him a cup of the ceremonial oath wine. It was supposed to bind his word, to let the ancestors sit in on the sentence. A silver goblet filled from a dark bottle carried up the steps by Elder Corvin himself and placed in the king's hand. Daemon had drunk from that cup at every midwinter for 9 years. He never thought about it. That was the whole point of a thing you do 100 times. You stop seeing it. Daemon lifted the cup, and down on the floor, chained and forgotten, Ren Ashkum caught the smell. She knew hunger had sharpened her nose. When you starve, your body starts screaming for anything, and your senses go raw and wide open. She could smell the tallow and the torches and the sweat on the guards and the snow melting off 200 cloaks. But this wasn't food. This was underneath the wine, folded into the sweetness, a thin, bitter thread that made the back of her throat clench and her tongue go dry. She knew that smell. Any Omega who had scraped a living off the forest floor knew it. Wolfsbane, ground root of the pale winter flower that grows in the shadow of the frost pines. A pinch of it kills a grown wolf in the time it takes to say goodnight. Ember was already moving. The gray wolf had been crouched in the shadows by the door where they'd chained her to, and now the chain snapped taut and then snapped clean, and every head in the hall turned. Ren didn't think. There wasn't time to think. There was only the cup rising toward the king's mouth and 2 words tearing out of her raw throat. Here's where it turns. Don't move. Her voice cracked the hall like a whip, and then louder, an Omega screaming at an Alpha King in front of his entire court. Follow me. Don't drink that. Don't you dare drink that. Have you ever heard a room go so quiet you can hear the torches? That's what happened. 200 wolves stopped breathing. An Omega chained on the floor had just shouted a command at the king. Commanded him, told him don't move. It broke every law they had. In the Ironclaw pack, an Omega who raised her voice to an Alpha could be struck down where she knelt and no one would blink. And she hadn't just raised it. She'd hurled it at the throne itself. The guards lunged for her. And that's when Ember reached the throne. The scarred gray wolf cleared the steps in 3 bounds and planted herself directly between Damon Voss and the goblet in his hand. Hackles up, head low, teeth bared. A snarl came out of her that rolled off the stone walls and dropped the temperature of the whole room. She wasn't looking at the king. She was looking at the cup, and she put her body between that cup and his lips like she'd die before she let them touch. The guards froze halfway across the floor, because here's the thing about a wolf that size, throat open and screaming murder. You do not rush her, not toward the king. One wrong move and it looks like an assassination, and everyone with a blade suddenly did the math and stayed exactly where they were. Damon Voss sat with the poisoned cup an inch from his mouth and a wolf's fangs an inch from his wrist, and he did not drink. He looked at the Omega on the floor. Chains, ribs, bread, eyes wild and certain. He looked at the wolf shaking with the effort of holding back. And in 9 years on that throne, through every plot and every knife, he had never once had a living soul throw their own life across his to save it. Nobody had ever done that. Not his warriors, not his elders, not his blood. Men had died for him, sure, in the way soldiers die, following orders into a fight. But nobody had ever, in one heartbeat, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, put their own body in front of his death. And she was the last soul in that valley who owed him anything. The old instinct in him said punish her. The court was watching. His authority was on the floor bleeding. Every rule said crush the Omega now and ask questions never. His hand should have signaled the guards. His mouth should have spoken the sentence. Instead, Alpha King Damon Voss went completely silent. He lowered the cup slow, and he set it on the arm of the throne, and he looked at Ren Ashkum, and for a long moment the mighty king of the Ironclaw pack could not find a single word to say. The hall waited. The elders waited. Corvin Thorn, who had carried that cup up the steps with his own 2 hands, stood very still with his old face gone carefully blank. Damon found his voice at last, and it was low. Explain. Just that, one word. Ren swallowed. Her throat was raw from screaming. There's wolfsbane in the wine, my king. Ground root. I can smell it from here. If you drink it, you'll be dead before the torches burn down. A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Wolfsbane. In the king's oath cup. Impossible. Corvin Thorn recovered first, the way old politicians do. Lies, he said smoothly, spreading his hands to the court. A thief will say anything to escape her sentence. She smells nothing. She's a starving Omega, half mad with hunger, using our sacred ceremony to save her worthless skin. My king, do not let her poison your judgment. Drink and let us be done with her. And you know what? It was a good speech. Half the hall nodded, because who were they going to believe? A revered elder who had served 2 kings, or the lowest Omega in the valley, caught red-handed stealing bread. Damon looked at the wine. He looked at Corvin. He looked at the wolf still snarling over the cup, and at the girl still chained on the floor. And the tired, suspicious king who trusted almost no one felt something turn over in his chest, because a wolf does not throw its body across a lie. A wolf smells what it smells. He picked up the cup again. The whole court leaned in. Ren's heart stopped. For one horrible second she thought he was going to drink it just to prove her wrong, the way proud men do. But he didn't lift it to his mouth. He held it out over the edge of the throne, above the head of a long-haired hunting hound that lay at the foot of the steps, and he tipped 3 drops onto the dog's tongue. The hound licked its lips. It rose. It took 2 steps, and then its legs went out from under it and it dropped to the stone, and it did not get up again. You could have heard a snowflake land. Damon Voss stood up from his throne. He looked at the dead dog. He looked at the cup in his hand. He looked at Elder Corvin Thorn, who had carried it to him. And the silence in that hall was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. If you're still with me, take 1 second right now and hit that subscribe button, because what the king did next, And what that little Omega revealed about who really wanted him dead is the part nobody in Frostpine Valley ever forgot. Daemon set the cup down like it was made of glass. He did not shout. That was the frightening part. He was very, very quiet. "Who filled this cup?" he asked. Nobody answered. Corvin Thorne's mouth opened and closed. "I asked," said the king, and now there was iron under the quiet. "Who filled the oath cup?" An elder near the back, younger, sweating, made the mistake of glancing toward Corvin, just a glance. But Daemon saw it, and so did everyone else. Corvin Thorne drew himself up. "This is madness. The dog was sick. The girl is a thief. You would take the word of a wolf and a corpse over the council that raised you." He turned to the guards, and here's where he overplayed his hand, because he pointed at Ren and said, "Kill the Omega and burn the beast. Now, before she says anything else." Before she says anything else. Daemon caught it. Of course he caught it. If the girl was a mad lying thief, what could she possibly say that a wolfsbane poisoned elder would need silence so fast? "A liar you let talk. You let a liar hang herself with her own mouth. You only silence someone who knows the truth." "No," said the king. "Nobody touches her." He came down the steps slow, and he crouched in front of the chained Omega so his eyes were level with hers. Up close she was even smaller than she'd looked, and her hands were shaking, and she still hadn't let go of the bread. "You," he said quietly, "say what you were going to say, all of it. And know that if you lie to me now, no wolf in this valley will save you." Ren looked at Ember. The gray wolf had come to stand beside her, ribs heaving, and she pressed her scarred head against Ren's cheek. And Ren, who had been afraid her whole life, found that she was not afraid anymore. When you have already screamed at a king and lived, the rest comes easy. "It's not just the wine," she said. "The wolfsbane didn't grow this year, not in this valley. The frost pine flower died in the early snow. I know because I forage every day just to eat, and there hasn't been a living stem of it since autumn, which means whoever ground that root has been storing it, drying it, planning this for months. This wasn't a sudden idea. Somebody has been waiting for midwinter court, when the whole pack is gathered and the oath cup is poured, so that when you fell dead in front of everyone, it would look like the ceremony itself struck you down, like the ancestors judged you unworthy. And a king struck down by the ancestors doesn't get avenged. He gets replaced." The hall was dead silent again, because that was clever. That was too clever for a starving girl to invent on the spot, and every wolf in the room knew it. "Go on," Daemon said. "There's more," Ren said. "The bread." She lifted her chained fist, the crust still in it. "This came from the royal stores. Everyone says the winter emptied them, that there's nothing left to feed the low ranks, that we have to starve so the warriors can eat. That's why I stole. But the storehouse I broke into wasn't empty, my king. It was full, sacks to the ceiling. Grain, dried meat, roots. Enough to feed every Omega and pup in the valley through 3 winters. I stood in the dark and I smelled it all, and I couldn't understand it. They told us there was nothing. There was a mountain. Somebody has been hoarding the pack's food and letting the bottom of the pack starve, and telling you the stores were bare." She looked up at him. "Who controls the stores?" Every head in the hall turned as one toward Elder Corvin Thorne, because the elders controlled the stores. Corvin controlled the stores, and now the shape of the whole thing came clear, and it was ugly. Starve the low ranks until they're desperate and angry and blame the king for the empty valley. Poison the king at the sacred court. Let it look like divine judgment. And step in, elder and savior, to take the throne while a hungry pack cheers you for it. Daemon rose slowly to his full height and turned to face the man who had raised him after his father died. "You told me the stores were empty," he said. "Every council meeting all winter you sat at my table and told me my people had to go hungry because the winter had beaten us. You looked me in the eye and you grieved with me for it. You let children starve to make them hate me, and then you poured me wine. Daemon. The old elder's voice changed, softer, the voice of the man who had once taught a frightened boy how to hold a sword. You were never strong enough for this crown. Your father knew it. I watched you flinch at your first challenger, and I knew it too. The valley is dying under you. What I did for the pack. One clean death, and the suffering ends. Don't let a mad Omega turn you against everything you. Stop talking, Daemon said, and the elder stopped talking. Then Corvin Thorn did the thing that cornered men do. He moved. His hand went into his fur cloak and came out with a thin blade, and he lunged, not at the king but at Ren, because a dead witness cannot testify, and if he could not have the throne, he would at least bury the truth in the throat of the girl who dug it up. He was fast for an old wolf, but he was not faster than Ember. The scarred gray she-wolf had never left Ren's side, and she met Corvin Thorn in the air. 200 pounds of muscle and old fury hit him full in the chest and drove him back and down onto the stone, and the blade went spinning away across the floor, and Ember stood over the elder with her jaws around his throat, not biting, just holding, one flex away from ending him, and she looked up at the king, waiting for the word. Daemon Voss looked down at the man who had lied to him, starved his people, and poisoned his cup, held under the fangs of an Omega's impossible wolf. The king could have said the word. Everyone expected him to. Let him live, Daemon said instead. Chain him. Chain all of them who knew. His eyes swept the row of elders, and 3 of them had gone white as the snow outside, and the guards took those 3 too. The pack will hear every word of this in open court. He wanted a public death. He'll get one, just not the one he planned. Ember let go. Corvin Thorn curled on the stone, alive, ruined, which was worse than dead, and he knew it. Then Daemon turned to Ren. He knelt again, and this time he took the chains off her wrists with his own hands. The king of the Ironclaw pack, kneeling to unlock an Omega in front of everyone. The metal fell away and clattered on the floor, and Ren rubbed her raw wrists and did not know what to do with her hands or her face or the sudden roaring quiet in her chest. You screamed at me, Daemon said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite a smile but was close. Don't move, follow me. Nobody has told me don't move since I was a pup. I'm sorry, Ren whispered. I didn't have time to be polite. And Daemon Voss laughed. Once, short, surprised out of him. The first true laugh anyone in that hall had heard from their king in longer than they could remember. And here is the part I want you to understand, the part that changed everything. When the king knelt close and the Omega looked up, both their wolves went still at the very same moment. Ember and the great black wolf that lived inside Daemon, the one that had never in 9 years found a match in the whole valley. They looked at each other, and they knew what the pack called fated, what the old songs called the bond that finds you once and never again, moved through that hall like a held breath finally let go. The king felt it hit him like a wall. So did she. It explained the impossible, didn't it? Why a starving Omega had a warrior's wolf. Why that wolf had thrown herself across a stranger king. Ember had smelled it before Ren ever did. She had been guarding her mate. Daemon didn't say any of that out loud. Not then. He just stood, and he lifted his voice so the whole hall could hear, and he said, "This Omega saved my life. From this hour she stands under the protection of the throne, and any wolf who calls her low again answers to me." Now let me tell you how it ended, because it didn't end in that hall. It ended slowly, over the rest of that long winter, and it ended better than anyone in Frostpine Valley had a right to expect. The full stores were opened that same night. Daemon walked to the storehouse himself, with Ren beside him and Ember pacing ahead, and he threw the doors wide and let the whole pack see the grain stacked to the roof, the lie made visible. Then he ordered every sack of it distributed, starting with the lowest ranks. the Omegas and the pups, the ones who had been dying quietly at the bottom while the elders talked of famine. Wren stood in the storehouse door and watched families she had grown up beneath, families who had never once shared a crust with her, carry away food with tears freezing on their faces, and she did not gloat, and she did not turn anyone away. She just made sure the smallest and the hungriest got fed first. She knew what last felt like. She was done letting anyone else learn it. Corvin Thorn and the elders who had plotted with him were tried in open court, exactly as the king promised, in front of the whole pack, with every word of it spoken plain. Wren testified. She was steady. When the elder tried one last time to call her a mad lying Omega, she simply asked the court to remember the dog on the stone floor, and nobody had an answer for that. The council was broken and rebuilt from the ground up, and this time the king put ordinary wolves on it, hunters and healers, and, to the shock of the whole valley, one Omega, who had a nose that could smell a lie folded into wine. You can guess which Omega. Wren never quite got used to the food at first. For weeks she still ate like it might be taken away, still tucked bread into her sleeve out of old habit, and Damon never once mocked her for it. He noticed everything, that man, and he never made her feel small for surviving the way she'd had to survive. Slowly, the sharp lines of hunger softened out of her face. Slowly, she stopped flinching when a hand moved fast near her. An Ember, the scarred gray wolf who had frightened a whole pack, took to sleeping across the doorway of the king's own hall, one torn ear up, at peace at last, her long guarding finally done. Damon Voss courted her the old way, slow and honest, and he asked her every step of the way, because a king who had learned what it meant to have someone risk everything for him was not going to take a single thing from that someone without asking. And Wren, who had spent her whole life being told what she was worth, learned a different number, one wolf and one man at a time. They were bonded at the turn of the next winter, a year to the day from the court where she'd screamed at him. The whole valley came, fed and warm this time. And when the elders, the new ones, poured the ceremonial oath cup, Wren was the one who lifted it first and breathed it in, slow and careful, before she smiled and handed it to her king. He drank. He didn't hesitate for a second. He trusted her nose over his own life, and that in the Ironclaw pack is very close to the truest thing a wolf can say. Sometimes, on the hard, cold nights, Wren still thought about that crust of bread. One loaf. That was the crime that dragged her in front of a king. If she hadn't stolen it, if the guards hadn't hauled her to court that exact hour, if hunger hadn't sharpened her nose to a razor, Damon Voss would have lifted that cup and died on his throne, while a starving pack cheered the man who killed him. The smallest thing in the whole valley had turned out to be the only thing standing between the king and a poisoned grave. She'd screamed 2 words at an alpha king: "Don't move. Follow me." And a room full of wolves who thought they were about to watch an Omega die had watched something else entirely. They'd watched the lowest of them become the reason their king was still breathing. Damon told her once, quietly in the dark, that in 9 years of ruling he had learned to trust no one, and it had taken a chained girl with a crust of bread to teach him he'd been wrong. Not about everyone, just about the one who mattered. And the king, who'd had nothing to say in that silent hall, the mighty Alpha left speechless by a starving Omega's scream, spent the rest of his life finding words for her. Every single day. Now you tell me, what would you have done chained on that floor when you smelled the poison? Would you have screamed? Or would you have stayed quiet and let it burn down? Stay warm out there. And don't ever let anyone tell you the smallest voice in the room can't stop a king.